take a look at Tesla right now. I don't follow Tesla almost at all, but it seems to be struggling. And maybe the share prices are not a great reflection of that, but its sales have not done well, in part because of competition, in part because of its own faults. Elon, in particular, I don't know how much he thinks about his companies today. He's been quiet after being terminated as co-president, and I'm not even seeing his tweets all that often anymore.
Well, that's hard to do.
But I think that what is a little bit strange is how I feel like Tesla has had more operational problems. So even that has rusted. It is joining the ranks of other apex manufacturers like Intel, Boeing, Detroit automakers. Previously, Tesla was the standout success. Now it seems to be pulled down by the broader morass. And what I would say is that there are some really visionary folks in the US, like absolutely visionary people that you speak to a lot, in California in particular. And I feel like they're fighting against this broader morass of declining manufacturing ability, declining process knowledge in the manufacturing industry, a million and one laws and regulations and problems that they have to face down, a million and one conventions and norms that are pulling at them at all times. And so my functional model for this is not that the US lacks any visionaries. There's just so many brilliant people here. But there's also just so many forces that are tugging at them at all points that are dragging down a little bit of their optimism, their confidence, their ability to get stuff done. And so that's the beginning of a hypothesis that I would offer you, that that's why the US isn't doing very well anymore.
I think it's why Elon went crazy. I think COVID was kind of like his breaking point. He was just like, you're just not gonna let me make stuff. I can't take it anymore, And he kind of snapped. I agree with you so much. I don't want to prattle on because I'm more interested in what you're saying. I just, I went to this reindustrialize conference in Detroit. I don't know, like a month or 6 weeks ago. And to your point, these are like people I talk to all the time. I'm into them. I mean, it's like this generation of people that want to bring manufacturing back to the United States. They have like interesting products and I do not mean this to like undermine. I think they are doing the right thing. There's part of it where I came back and I'm like, not like it's play acting, but I'm like, if this is it, this was a conference, there's like 1,000, 1,200 people there. They're all kind of preaching to the choir. They've bought in. I'm like, man, this should be the biggest thing in America right now, because like this is the last hope as far as I could see, and it still seemed like a pittance. I went around Detroit. I went to Atomic Industry, so they're trying to kind of reinvent tool and die making, which is fantastic. They want to do this like modern take on it. So it's like we're not gonna, like you write in the book, it's like the ship has kind of sailed on catching up to China at this point. So you got to do something different. So they want to do tool and die making a different way. But like every machine in their building that they rely on to develop this new tool and die making technology comes from Germany, Japan, even Portugal. Like the US doesn't make the foundational machines anymore. So that left me sort of depressed. Then I went to GM. They have this huge battery R&D operation. They're working on new chemistries for car batteries, which is fantastic. They've kind of like, alongside Panasonic, I believe, come up with a new recipe for future batteries. But then they're telling me it's like, oh well, the University of Texas developed the lithium ion technology that pretty much the entire world relies on. We just didn't happen to do anything with it. China mastered, making those. You write about like tons of these instances. The U.S. invents something, solar, and then China figures out how to make it. And so, yeah, I don't know. My general takeaway was really weird because I was like excited that these other people were all excited to like do this. And obviously Trump is kind of like putting some policies in place to make some of this possible. But man, it really, like when you write at the end about this is what we need, is like I agree with you, but then it feels very small. I don't feel that like most people even remotely, like I would urge people to read your book so that they can understand how far what we would be talking about is like a national, everybody getting behind this sort of movement to try to make this happen. And I feel like we're far, far from that.
Yeah, I mean, when we bring up the tariffs, maybe the paradox in the US is that the sentiments are always in place, the goal and the objectives are always correct, but it's always the implementation that fails in some pretty significant way. Trump wants to reindustrialize America, Biden wants to reindustrialize America. How are they doing? Well, I'm more sympathetic to the Biden approach, which is to fund chips and clean energy build out. But it didn't really, I mean, the chips money was allocated, but we haven't had much infrastructure build out, right? And so the implementation was just not there. And if we take a look at Trump's approach, I mean, I think that is just flawed from the start. If we take a look at the tariffs, since April, the US has lost about 80,000 manufacturing jobs. Manufacturing activity has contracted for about 6 months now. It doesn't make sense to become a technological scientific superpower by denying funding to NSF and NIH and all the other funding agencies. It doesn't make sense to deport our manufacturing workforce, especially not the high-skilled Korean type. It doesn't make sense to frighten researchers away. Now, maybe there's something good about energy policy. Maybe there's something good about the deregulatory agenda. I'm sure there will be something good about the deregulatory agenda. But most of these don't seem to work very well. And I'm curious to hear a little bit more about your take on the reindustrialize. I wasn't able to make it. But I heard, I mean, there are some people who went and said there have been some protests, in part because the Secretary of Defense, Hegseth, was one of the keynote speakers. I understand the impulse, but I mean, did it feel partisan? Did it feel weird? Did it feel interesting in good ways? Was it optimistic?
The conference itself was optimistic. It was partisan in the sense that it was like a very patriotic. It was like hardcore America thumping. The protests were sort of stupid. It was probably like, I want to say like 30, 40 people. It was kind of like this like anti-pal. It was all Palantir related, and it was like it was more like a Palestine thing. I don't think the people protesting had any idea of like what the conference stood for, or they just knew Palantir and Andrew were there, and it was mostly Palantir, and so that was that part of it. I can tell something has changed in that I've been covering hardware all this time, and I used to be. I wasn't like fringe, but I was one of like not many people focusing on this sort of stuff. And obviously, in the last 2 years, now people are like, "Oh, we're in this new age of manufacturing and hardware," and we are, people are kind of are finding those things and attaching to them. The New York Times wrote about the reindustrialized conference. I assumed it would have taken them like 5 or 6 years to sort of figure out that that conference was taking place. So I guess I was impressed by that. So, like, I do feel like there's bits of this, but then going back to what I was saying from your book, I mean, there is this part where it's like no one probably ever will match what China has already achieved at this point. And, it has the population size. It's got so many factors that, like, even if the US was like, no, we are going to become the world center for all manufacturing. I mean, probably like it doesn't work out for a bunch of reasons you lay out. I mean, the standard of living here, the wages, the workers wouldn't tolerate the conditions needed to pull that off. So then I'm just left. I'm with you. I'm like, I want this optimistic call. I want these reindustrialized people to work, but then it's almost like to what end, I guess, because we can't get all the way to apples to apples type thing. And so what are you arguing that that's okay, but if we focus on improving our infrastructure and modernizing the country and bringing some of this back, that's enough? Is that kind of
Let me make you more pessimistic.
okay?
I think right now the US has about 12 million people employed in manufacturing. It never recovered to its 2008 highs after plunging. And I worry that there will be another big China shock, in which China initially took all of these textile and jobs that are not terribly important, but now it is just much, much more competitive in all sorts of advanced technologies. I strongly believe that made in China is now a marker of excellent quality, whereas was known for shoddy quality in the past. You can see this in the trade data in which German exports of automotives in particular has started to fall pretty substantially over essentially the last year as Chinese automakers have outcompeted German automakers in all of these cars. And I think that China will eat the lunch of other industrialized countries, namely Japan, South Korea, Germany, in terms of all these machine tools, all of these automotive components. It's going to get a lot better. And I worry that the US right now has not super exposed to China, in part because it doesn't specialize in these sort of things. But for the 12 million manufacturing workers, could I see that to go down by a couple of million over the next 5 years? I think there could be a case. That's true. And once these job losses start to take place, I don't think our economics writ large will get much better. I don't think our political dysfunctions will get much better when these manufacturing jobs disappear. And so that is really what I'm worried about. And I think that, you know, we should try to resist that as best as we can. Um, because right now, the failures of Boeing, Intel, Detroit automakers has not been primarily due to Chinese competition. It's been mostly due to management failures, I would argue, and engineering quality failures as well. Um, and I think we need to get much better infrastructure in America, not to outcompete China in high-speed rail or anything, but just because we need much better Caltrain service, such that workers can get in between Silicon Valley and San Francisco. And so these are like the sort of the basics that let's just get the basics right, not out of geopolitical competition, but because people need them. And then hopefully, if we can have much better levels of infrastructure, then we have a little bit more margin to resist deindustrialization as well, because the companies would have a little bit more buffer to operate in. And so that is a lot of what I'm saying. It's not about competition. Let's just do things better for our own people.